Ethan Carter never wanted to be famous. Yet here he was, bound in biometal cuffs, standing before a towering alien princess whose golden eyes burned with fascination. "You are a human," she said, rolling the word across her tongue like a fine delicacy. "A rare sight in my empire." Ethan kept his face blank. He knew what happened to humans in the Ziran Empire. They were entertainment. Gladiators, slaves, exotic playthings for the rich. "Let me go," he said. "I'm not part of your war. I'm just a cargo pilot." Kalen's lips curved into a sharp, predatory smile. "Let you go? But you interest me, human. And it has been so long since I've been interested in anything." The throne room was massive. Polished obsidian walls, flowing banners of deep crimson, and an audience of Ziran elites who whispered among themselves. He felt like an animal on display. He had crash-landed on the Ziran homeworld 3 days ago, and since then he had been dragged through interrogation, mocked for his species' weakness, and finally presented before the Empire's newly anointed heir. Ethan clenched his fists. He would not break. "I refuse," he said, forcing strength into his voice. Kalen leaned forward, intrigued. How adorable! Then she stood, stepping down from her hovering throne, her long, elegant robes shifting like liquid metal. "You misunderstand, Ethan Carter." The air thickened. Zirans were psionic. They could impose their will with a thought. A cold shiver ran down Ethan's spine. He refused to kneel. She reached out, fingers brushing his cheek. An electric pulse raced through him. A voice, deep and warm, whispered in his mind. "Mine." Ethan's breath caught. "Oh shit." The crowd erupted in gasps. Even the guards looked stunned. Kalen grinned, victorious. "Your defiance is delicious," she purred. "But you belong to me now." A pause. Then Galactic Reddit got the news. Breaking news. A human just got claimed by the Ziran princess. Holy S**. Ethan's mind raced as he paced the small cell. His hands twitched, itching for some sort of tool, some way to break free. He had been locked in this prison for 2 days, a gilded cage designed to house an emperor. But he wasn't an emperor, he was just a man caught in a nightmare. Kalen's words echoed in his mind. "You belong to me now." He gritted his teeth. She was wrong. He would never belong to her or any alien empire. But even in his fury, he knew this was no simple matter. Kalen wasn't just another tyrant. She was a psionic, someone whose power could warp minds with a glance. Her entire empire was built on superiority, on the strength of its leaders and their mental dominance over others. Humans, in their eyes, were nothing but primitive creatures. Except he wasn't just any human. Ethan had survived far worse odds before, and this was a challenge he couldn't walk away from. He sat on the floor of his cell, focusing on his breathing, on the things that made him human. His adaptability, his resourcefulness, his grit. He had escaped worse situations before, on the fringes of known space where the law was a suggestion and survival was a game. The door slid open with a soft hiss, and he stood in one fluid motion. Kalen appeared, her presence overwhelming. Her golden eyes locked onto his, sharp and unblinking. She was regal, poised. Nothing like the princess he had imagined from the fleeting glimpses of her empire's broadcasts. She was otherworldly, her skin glistening like polished marble, her hair woven with streaks of silver and indigo. "I'm not keeping you here to break you, Ethan," she said, her voice like velvet, though her words carried the weight of a command. "I want you to understand. You're mine, not just as my consort, but as someone who will help me. Your people have something we need." Ethan clenched his fists. His instincts told him to fight, but he needed more than brute force to win this. He had to be smarter. "I won't help you with anything," he growled, keeping his posture stiff. "I'm not your toy." Kalen didn't flinch. Instead, she stepped closer, so close that her breath brushed against his skin. The air around them seemed to shift, a subtle pressure that spoke of her power. "You misunderstand me," she whispered, her fingers tracing the edge of his jaw. "You're not just any human. You're a wild card. You're unpredictable. And that makes you valuable." He wanted to shove her away, to break free from her touch, but somehow he couldn't move. Her presence was like a magnetic force drawing him in. "What do you want from me?" Ethan managed to choke out. Kalen's lips curved into a smile that sent a chill down his spine. "I want you to help me reshape the galaxy. Together we could rule. You, a human, by my side." The Ziran people would never have seen it coming. She was trying to seduce him into her cause. But he wasn't that easily swayed. "Yeah? And if I say no?" He took a step back, his heart hammering in his chest. "What then? You just force me into your little games." Her smile faltered, but only for a moment. Then, she nodded. "Yes, I would. But I don't want to do that, Ethan. I don't want to break you. I'm hoping you'll come to see it my way." He met her gaze, the weight of her psionic aura pressing on him like an invisible hand. He could feel the temptation rising in him, the pull of her power. But he shook his head, clearing his mind. He had to get out of here, and he couldn't do that by giving in to her will. "I'll never be your puppet," he spat. Kalen tilted her head, as if pondering his words. "No, not a puppet," she agreed. "But you could be something more. Something powerful." Ethan felt a strange flicker of doubt. Could he be more? The Ziran Empire was vast, far more advanced than humanity, with technology and power he couldn't even begin to understand. Was it possible that he could take something from this? Use it to his advantage? Before he could voice his thoughts, the door slid open again. One of her guards stepped forward, a tall, armored Ziran who looked more like a beast than a person. His red eyes glowed ominously. "Your Highness, the Council has requested your presence. They are not pleased with your choice of consort." Kalen's eyes flashed with annoyance. "They will learn to accept it. Ethan stays with me." She turned back to Ethan, her gaze softening. "I will be back soon. Think about what I've said." With that, she left, her flowing robes disappearing around the corner. Ethan stood there, his mind racing. Escape. That had been his only goal since he had landed here. But now it felt like the walls were closing in. The princess was too powerful, and with every passing second, it seemed that his options were narrowing. He couldn't trust her. He couldn't trust anyone in this empire. But if he was going to survive, he needed to outplay them. He would have to use their underestimation of humans to his advantage. As the door hissed shut behind him, a message blinked up on his terminal. It was a comment from Galactic Reddit. "At Terran Tactician, don't give up, man. They're underestimating you. You've got this." He read it once, then twice. The humans on Reddit were watching. His fight wasn't just his own anymore. It was for all of humanity. He wasn't alone. And he wouldn't give up. He couldn't. The air in the Imperial arena was thick with anticipation. Thousands of Ziran eyes were fixed on the stage, and at the center of it all stood Ethan Carter, still reeling from the incredible offer Kalen had made to him. It had been 2 days since her visit, and now he was here, facing the one trial he couldn't avoid. A public duel against the best of the Ziran warriors. Kalen had promised it would be a way out, a chance to leave her side if he could prove himself worthy. But Ethan wasn't so sure. His instincts screamed at him to flee, to break free of this entire situation. But he couldn't. The Zirans were watching. They were waiting for him to fail. And the consequences of failure weren't something he cared to imagine. He wasn't just fighting for his freedom. He was fighting to make a point. That humanity wasn't weak, that they weren't just footnotes in the history of the universe. Across from him, a massive figure loomed, a Ziran warrior in full combat regalia, tall, armored in glistening black steel, and carrying a spiked halberd that looked like it could pierce a starship's hull. The crowd around the arena was silent, the kind of silence that felt like a storm was about to break. Zirans were built for combat. Their bodies were designed to survive in environments far harsher than Earth's, with reflexes and strength that made them nearly unstoppable. But Ethan had something they didn't. His adaptability, his unpredictability. He wasn't bound by the rigid rules of combat that the Zirans lived by. Ethan glanced at Kalen, sitting high on her throne above the arena, her gaze unwavering. Her eyes locked onto his, a smirk playing at the corners of her lips. She was watching him, but there was something in her gaze, a spark of respect mixed with expectation. She knew he wasn't a warrior, but she was giving him this opportunity nonetheless. It wasn't a chance for freedom. It was a test, one he couldn't afford to fail. The gong rang, signaling the start of the duel. The warrior charged, his footfalls shaking the ground beneath them. His halberd swung toward Ethan, its blade gleaming with deadly intent. The crowd roared in excitement. Ethan's heart pounded in his chest. He sidestepped, narrowly avoiding the strike, the air humming as the blade passed within inches of his face. The Xiran warrior didn't hesitate, swinging again, faster this time, with an attack aimed at Ethan's midsection. But Ethan was already moving, his body instinctively ducking under the blow. He rolled to the side, his mind working in overdrive, searching for weaknesses, looking for an opening. The warrior growled in frustration, realizing that this human wasn't just a simple target. Ethan's mind raced. The warrior's movements were predictable, but the way his massive form flowed with each strike was elegant. Too elegant. The Xiran had strength on his side, but Ethan had speed, precision, and cunning. He couldn't overpower him, but he could outmaneuver him. He darted forward, feinting left. The warrior swung with all his might, but Ethan was already behind him, leaping onto his back in one smooth motion. He wrapped his legs around the warrior's waist, pulling himself up with surprising strength for someone who didn't have the same genetic enhancements. The warrior roared in fury, trying to shake him off, but Ethan tightened his grip, locking his arm around the warrior's neck in a chokehold. The crowd gasped. No one had ever seen a human try something like this before. The Xiran warrior staggered, struggling to break free, but Ethan had him where he wanted him. Every movement was calculated. Every breath was measured. The warrior was strong, but Ethan was smarter. He knew that if he could hold on long enough, he could win. For a moment, everything went still. The warrior's thrashing slowed, his breath growing more labored. Ethan pressed harder, using the last of his strength to constrict the hold. The warrior's body began to sag, his grip on the halberd faltering. Ethan's vision blurred with exhaustion, but he refused to let go. He couldn't. He wouldn't. Finally, with a sickening gasp, the Xiran warrior slumped forward, unconscious. The arena fell into an eerie silence. Ethan dropped to his feet, panting, his body aching, his muscles trembling from the strain. He had done it. He had won. But before he could fully process the victory, he was lifted off the ground by a massive hand. The Xiran royal guard. "You have defeated our champion," the guard growled. "But you will face us now. The princess wants you to know this isn't over." The guard's tone was laced with venom. They weren't happy that a human had bested one of their own. But there was nothing they could do now. Ethan's eyes flicked up to Kaylin in the stands. She stood, her expression unreadable, her golden eyes glowing in the dim light of the arena. Slowly, she raised her hand, signaling for the fight to stop. "Enough," she said, her voice carrying across the arena like a command from the heavens. The crowd's murmur quieted. The guards hesitated, looking to her for direction. She locked eyes with Ethan, her gaze filled with both fury and something else. Admiration. "You have proven yourself, Ethan Carter," she said, her voice clear and authoritative. "But this is only the beginning." The crowd roared again, but this time, it wasn't for the defeat of their warrior. It was for the human who had just shown them that not all strength came from size or alien enhancements. Ethan stood tall, a spark igniting in his chest. He wasn't a prisoner anymore. He was something more. He had earned his place here, among the stars, among the power brokers of the galaxy. And he wasn't leaving without taking a piece of it for himself. The aftermath of Ethan's victory echoed through the halls of the palace for days. The Xirans were still reeling from the unexpected defeat, and the whispers of a human outsmarting their strongest warrior had spread like wildfire. Ethan could feel the eyes of the entire empire upon him. Every encounter, every conversation, was tinged with suspicion or resentment, except for Kaylin's. After the duel, she had been waiting for him, as though expecting him to fail. But when he succeeded, her reaction was one of a strange pride, tempered with an intensity that made him uneasy. He had won her respect, But now the stakes were higher than ever. She wasn't done with him. Ethan sat in a lavish chamber, his body sore from the fight but still humming with the adrenaline of victory. The walls of his room shimmered with alien technology, which only served to remind him how deep in enemy territory he was. But his mind was focused elsewhere. His communicator buzzed. The message was short and direct. "You've earned a meeting with me. It's time to talk about your role, Kalen." With a sigh, Ethan rubbed his temples. He wasn't sure if he was ready for what came next. The Ziran Empire was a beast, a system built on power, control, and superiority. But he knew that Kalen wasn't the typical ruler. She had seen something in him, a human, and that meant everything. His hand hovered over the console, then he punched in the access code. The door slid open, and Kalen stepped inside, her regal presence as magnetic as ever. "You're looking better than I expected," she said, her voice soft but filled with an edge. She was standing just a little too close. Ethan didn't flinch. "I've been through worse." Kalen smiled, and for a moment, there was genuine amusement in her eyes. "You're starting to understand. The Zirans respect strength. They respect survival." She paused, studying him as though weighing the words. "And you, Ethan Carter, survived the impossible. I didn't do it alone." She inclined her head slightly, acknowledging his point. "True. But you did something that no other human has ever done. You earned a seat at the table." Ethan stood from the chair, his stance defiant. "You can't expect me to join your war, Kalen. I'm not your pawn. I came here to survive, not to start a conquest." Kalen's expression darkened. For the first time, she seemed genuinely conflicted. "You're right. I can't expect you to fight for me. But I need you. And I believe," she stopped herself, as if weighing the significance of the next words. "I believe you can be more than a survivor. You could be a leader." Ethan's mind whirled. A leader? He wasn't a general, wasn't a politician. He was just a man who knew how to outthink his enemies. But there was a fire in Kalen's words, something that made him think this wasn't just about fighting battles. It was about reshaping the entire galaxy. "I'm not interested in ruling anything," Ethan said, his voice steady. "But I'll help you get your throne. That's all." Kalen's gaze never left his. "A throne is nothing without the power to hold it." Her voice dropped to a near whisper. "And I need you to help me take that power." Her words hung in the air like a promise or perhaps a threat. Ethan took a deep breath. He had seen enough of her empire to know that Kalen wasn't playing a game. She was willing to burn everything to the ground to build something new, something different. And she wanted him to be a part of it. "All right," he said, meeting her gaze. "Let's talk." The next few days passed in a blur of strategy sessions, whispered conversations, and covert meetings. Kalen kept Ethan close, her advisors watching him with skeptical eyes. But none of them could deny that his input had proven invaluable. His knowledge of guerrilla tactics, his understanding of human psychology, and his quick thinking made him more than just an outsider. He was becoming a vital part of Kalen's court. Ethan didn't trust the Zirans. Not one of them. The nobles were more interested in their own power than in any shared vision Kalen spoke of. And while Kalen's own loyalty to her people was unshakable, Ethan could sense her frustration with the lack of unity in the empire. "You're the one who's going to make it work," she said one evening, her voice softer than usual. "I've never met anyone like you, Ethan. Your people are so different. But I believe that's why you'll succeed where the Zirans have failed." "Maybe." Ethan didn't look up as he carefully studied the holographic map of the empire sprawled before him. "But don't get too comfortable with the idea of me being some kind of savior. I'm not here to build your empire. I'm here because you need me to help keep you in power." Kalen smirked, but there was something genuine in the way she looked at him. It wasn't just about power. Not anymore. "I'm not asking you to save me, Ethan," she said. "I'm asking you to help me break the system." The words hit him like a shockwave. What did that mean? To tear down everything and rebuild it from the ground up? To challenge the very foundations of the Ziran Empire? That wasn't just about ruling, it was about creating a new order. "I need to know you're in this for the right reasons," she added, her eyes searching his face. I need you to understand what I'm trying to do here. What we could do. Together. Ethan's heart pounded. He could feel the pull of her words, the weight of her conviction, but something in the back of his mind told him to be careful. She was powerful, brilliant, and dangerous, and for all her claims of a new order, she wasn't entirely transparent with him. I'm in this because I don't want to die, he said, his voice steady. And I'm definitely not your pawn. Kaylin leaned forward, her gaze never leaving his. Then let's see how far we can take this, Ethan. Together, the darkness of space stretched endlessly before them, a canvas of stars and emptiness, as the Ziran flagship, the Imperium's vow, moved silently through the black void. Inside, Ethan sat at the heart of the Empire's most sophisticated war room, surrounded by Kaylin's closest advisors and military strategists. The air was thick with tension. They were preparing for something monumental, an uprising that could tear the entire galaxy apart. Ethan felt the weight of the decision that had led him here. He wasn't just playing a part anymore. He was involved, deeply involved in Kaylin's revolution, whether he liked it or not. They were no longer just plotting to secure her throne. They were plotting to reshape the very foundation of the Ziran Empire, and with it, the destiny of countless worlds. It's time, Kaylin said, her voice a whisper of steel. She stood at the front of the room, her long black and silver hair cascading down her back, a stark contrast to the bright holoscreens that surrounded them. We strike at the core of the council. We take their power and we take the galaxy. Ethan's heart beat faster. He knew the council was where all decisions for the Empire were made, the ultimate authority in Ziran politics. To strike at them meant to hit the very core of the Empire's stability. But the risk was enormous. There were millions of lives at stake. And if this didn't go perfectly, the entire galaxy would descend into chaos. You're sure about this? Ethan asked, his voice tight with both skepticism and caution. The council won't just sit back and let us tear it down. We won't just tear it down, Kaylin said, turning to face him, her golden eyes flashing with determination. We will replace it. The Zirans need new leadership, one that understands what's broken. And I know you understand that better than anyone. Ethan's mind raced. Kaylin was a brilliant strategist, but there was an edge to her plans. They were risky even for someone of her abilities. She wasn't just toppling the leadership of the Ziran Empire. She was challenging an entire system. Have you figured out how we're going to handle the psionics? He asked, referring to the vast array of mind-warping powers the Ziran elite possessed. He had seen what Kaylin was capable of, but their psionics weren't something that could be fought with standard tactics. They needed a plan. We will use the one thing they never expected. The human element. Kaylin's lips curled into a small smile. The unpredictability of your species is our greatest asset. They think you're primitive, weak, unworthy of the power we're going to seize. But you are the perfect weapon. Ethan bristled at the idea of being used as a weapon, but part of him understood. The Zirans had long underestimated humanity. They saw them as an inferior species, easy to control, easy to break. But what they didn't see coming was how humanity's unpredictability could be the very thing that brought their empire to its knees. Kaylin turned to one of her strategists, a tall Ziran with long, black and silver markings running down his arms. Merrick, she said, her tone commanding, set up the final plan. We need to strike fast, hit the heart of the council. We need all their communications cut off, no escape, no warning. They won't see it coming. Merrick nodded, his glowing red eyes betraying little emotion. He activated the holoscreen in front of him, and a detailed map of the council's fortress appeared in the air. Ethan studied it carefully, the maze of corridors, security checkpoints, and highly guarded entrances. But his mind wasn't on the details of the attack. He was thinking about the bigger picture. We can't just attack blindly, Ethan said, his voice steady. We need to take out their command structure first. Without their leaders, their military won't know what to do. The longer we drag this out, the more likely they are to retaliate. We need to fracture their unity before we strike. Kaylin's eyes gleamed with admiration. I knew you understood. That's why I need you with me, Ethan. You see the Empire as it is, fractured and weak. Together, we can break it, then rebuild something stronger. He nodded, though the weight of the plan still sat heavy on his shoulders. You're asking me to help you destroy a galaxy's worth of lives. Kalen didn't flinch. No, Ethan. I'm asking you to help me liberate them. This isn't just about me or the Zirans. It's about the entire galaxy. The Empire is dying, and it's time for a new era. Ethan stared at her, feeling a mix of admiration and unease. She truly believed in what she was doing. But could she trust him? Would humanity be her ally, or just another stepping stone in her path to ultimate power? Later that night, in the quiet of the war room, Ethan couldn't sleep. He had been staring at the blueprints for the Council's fortress, but it was Kalen's words that haunted him. This is about the entire galaxy. How far was he willing to go? How much of his humanity was he willing to sacrifice to be part of this revolution? He rose from his seat, stepping over to the window where the vastness of space stretched out before him. The stars glimmered faintly, like a reminder of everything that was at stake. His thoughts were interrupted by the soft sound of the door sliding open. Kalen stepped inside. Her presence felt even before he turned to face her. "Couldn't sleep?" she asked, her voice gentle but filled with an underlying intensity. Ethan nodded, not trusting himself to speak. He wasn't sure if he was talking to Kalen anymore or if he was talking to the leader she was becoming. "I'm afraid," she admitted, her voice unexpectedly soft. "Afraid of what will happen if we don't win. If we fail, everything will be destroyed. I will be destroyed. The Empire will crumble, and no one will be left to save us." Ethan turned to her, his heart heavy with the weight of her words. For all her strength, Kalen was just as vulnerable as anyone else. She wasn't some indomitable force. She was a woman with a vision, one that would either save or destroy everything she held dear. He stepped closer, looking her in the eye. "Then we'll make sure we don't fail." Her golden eyes softened, a flicker of gratitude crossing her face. "You still trust me, even now?" Ethan gave a small, reluctant smile. "I trust that you'll keep me alive, and that's the best I can do." Kalen smiled, the weight of the galaxy shifting slightly on her shoulders. "Then let's make sure this new galaxy is worth fighting for." The time had come. Ethan stood at the edge of the battlefield, his gaze fixed on the colossal council fortress that loomed before him like a dark monolith. The last few days had been a blur of action and preparation, each piece of their plan falling into place with a precision that only Kalen could orchestrate. But now, standing at the precipice of their final confrontation, everything felt different. The stakes had escalated to heights he couldn't ignore. There was no going back. Beside him, Kalen exuded a calm confidence. Her eyes, however, betrayed the storm brewing within her. She wasn't just fighting for the throne anymore. She was fighting for something larger. The future. The galaxy. "You ready?" Ethan asked, his voice steady despite the chaos building inside him. Kalen nodded, her lips curling into a determined smile. "I've been ready for this my entire life." The battle began with precision. Kalen's forces, a mix of elite Ziran soldiers and human insurgents, moved swiftly into position, cutting through the fortress's outer defenses with terrifying efficiency. The Ziran military was formidable, but Ethan's people, humans, had become an unexpected force. They were wild cards, unpredictable, but that was what made them so deadly. Their guerrilla tactics had kept the Empire's forces on edge for weeks, and now they were on the offensive, striking when and where the Zirans least expected. But it wasn't just military might that would win this battle. It was psychological warfare. The Zirans had underestimated the human mind, and Kalen had harnessed that unpredictability to turn the tide. Ethan led the charge at one of the main gates, his pulse quickening with every step. He could hear the sounds of fighting in the distance, the roar of weapons firing, the clash of steel against armor. But in that moment it was all background noise. His focus was entirely on the mission, and on Kalen's safety. The two of them fought side by side, Kalen's graceful movements cutting through her enemies with the precision of a blade, while Ethan used his tactical knowledge to anticipate their next move. Together they were unstoppable. They worked in perfect harmony, a reflection of their unspoken bond. As they breached the inner sanctum of the fortress, they encountered the first wave of council members. These were the Ziran elites, the ones who had ruled for centuries, their power unmatched. But now, they faced an adversary they couldn't predict: humanity's ingenuity. The council members, once so sure of their dominance, were now scrambling. The room, a vast chamber filled with floating holographic displays of the Empire's holdings, was now filled with chaos. Ethan could see the fear in their eyes as they realized they had been caught off guard by a force they didn't understand. Their psionic powers, once a force of terror, were no match for the unpredictability of humans who had spent generations fighting with nothing but sheer will and determination. Kaylin moved forward, her voice ringing out with authority. "The Empire ends today." The council members stepped back, their expressions a mix of disbelief and defiance. The leader of the Ziran Council, a tall figure draped in dark robes, stepped forward. His face was lined with the wisdom of ages, but beneath it, Ethan saw the flicker of a man who had lost control. "You think you can tear down centuries of rule with your revolution?" The Ziran leader spat, his voice cold. "Do you think humanity is capable of governing anything? You are nothing but a fleeting distraction." Ethan stepped forward, meeting the leader's gaze with unwavering confidence. "Humanity may be young, but we know how to fight for what we believe in. We've been doing it for centuries, and we don't quit." The leader's eyes narrowed. "You are nothing but pawns in her game, Ethan Carter. She will use you and cast you aside when she's done. Don't be so naive." Kaylin's voice was icy. "You've underestimated us all. It's not about me. It's about everyone who has been silenced by your tyranny. This empire has been built on the backs of people like them, like us, and it's time for it to fall." The room was charged with tension. The Zirans were a proud people, but they were outnumbered, outmatched, and facing an enemy they had never fully understood. Ethan could feel the weight of the moment, the sense that history was being rewritten before his eyes. The leader looked to his council, trying to find any semblance of support, but none came. One by one, they bowed their heads, acknowledging defeat. It was over. The empire was crumbling, and a new order was rising from the ashes. Ethan turned to Kaylin, meeting her eyes. For the first time, he saw a flicker of hope in her expression. "We did it," she whispered, her voice filled with awe. "We really did it." Ethan nodded, but his mind was already racing. They had toppled the Ziran Empire, but that didn't mean the galaxy would be any easier to navigate. The power vacuum left behind would invite conflict from every corner of the universe. Civil wars, rebellions, empires rising from the ashes trying to seize control. The fight was far from over. But Kaylin was no longer just a ruler of a crumbling empire. She had become something more. "I think it's time for humanity to take its place among the stars," Ethan said, his voice low but filled with resolve. "Not just as survivors, but as leaders." Kaylin smiled, her eyes gleaming with determination. "Humanity will rise, Ethan, and we will build a galaxy that no one can tear down." The battle was won. The Ziran Empire was no more. But the journey of humanity's ascent had only just begun. Together, Ethan and Kaylin had changed the course of the galaxy, and nothing would ever be the same again.